Now, Hong Kong authorities have intensified their crackdown on dissent ahead of a sensitive anniversary. Today marks the 5th anniversary of Beijing's rejection of a call or universal suffrage in Hong Kong. That decision sparked the 79-day umbrella movement in 2014. Well, yesterday, police conducted waves of arrests. Among those detained were prominent campaigners Agnes, Chow, Joshua Wong, and the crackdown comes on the day that news agency Reuters reported that Beijing had earlier rejected Hong Kong government's recommendation to withdraw a contentious extradition bill, which sparked the latest wave of protests. Well, we cross now live to our correspondent Patrick Fok, who's for an update there. Thanks so much indeed, Patrick, for joining us. I see a lot of umbrellas behind you, but this is a march that was banned, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. A lot of umbrellas and a lot of people. We weren't sure whether or not this was going to be taking place at all today. As you say, the police had banned this march. It went to an appeals board and it was turned down as well. But people have come out in force, perhaps because of some of the events that have taken place over the last 24 hours. People have been angered by this wave of arrest of prominent opposition figures and also by this revelation by Reuters saying that the chief executive had recommended to the central government that withdrawing the bill was the best way to defuse the crisis, and that the central government had turned down and rejected Lam's advice and said that she wasn't to yield to any of the protesters' demands. So, you know, as we know, there is a specific point that people are coming out today for. They are here to remind Beijing that we were offered universal suffrage 5 years ago, but they weren't willing to accept it under Beijing's terms, which would have meant that Beijing would still be able to screen the candidates. And so that is something that the pan-democrats weren't willing to accept at the time, and most likely aren't willing to accept now either.
So with the prominent campaigners arrested or detained, is this organized, or just people literally just showing up, egging each other on via social media and other means?
Well, it's very hard to say, and we know that there has been some sort of clampdown on lots of different sites and means of communications, particularly the application Telegram that a lot of protesters have been using to try and organize this protest movement. But certainly it's a sign, along with these arrests that have taken place, that authorities are getting more and more desperate. And reports have said previously that China had set a deadline of sorts for the unrest to end by early September. It's very clear that that isn't going to happen now. So there's a good likelihood that we are going to see authorities clamp down even further. And there is some concern, particularly given what we're seeing out here right now. A lot of people dressing up in protective gear and gas masks, that there could be some serious unrest to take place later on today.
This has been going on for months now, hasn't it, these marches, and I'm sure that Beijing, as you were saying, that they probably need to find another way forward here at this stage.
Well, that's right. As far as most people are concerned, most of the protesters out here, this is something that can't be ended by force. It is something that requires a political solution. And a lot of people are also questioning, well, you know, if the chief executive had her advice turned down, then why is she even still the chief executive? Why hasn't she taken it on herself to step down? That is a question that we just don't understand at this point, and because a lot of people are questioning whether or not this is an example of Beijing interfering or undermining the principle of one country, two systems.
But for Beijing, I guess this is a really difficult and impossible situation for them, because they consider China to be China, and this idea that parts of the country can have its own dispensation would be problematic for them, especially grappling with issues like Taiwan, Tibet. They can't have a Hong Kong that seems to be independent. Well, the narrative that
mainland media is trying to project is that this is an independence movement. But if you speak to a lot of the protesters out here, this is not necessarily about that at all. For a lot of them, they just want the principle of one country, two systems, as it was meant to be implemented, to be respected. And that is what the majority of the people out here are fighting for. So yes, it is difficult for China if that's what they think this is about. But I think most people out here would tell you that simply isn't the case. But Beijing is certainly that their patience is wearing thin, and we have seen a stronger hand, if you like, to try and end this unrest. And of course they're concerned about this spoiling the party when it comes to the 70th anniversary of the founding of the PRC, which is going to happen on October 1st.
So so far, it's about 5 o'clock your time now. No clashes with police and no arrests that you've seen so far today. But things could change once night falls.
Well, things could change at any time. It's been really quite strange. This seems to be quite an organic rally. There doesn't seem to have been a specific starting point. There were different groups that began their march at different points across the city. They are moving westwards. I'm at Chater Garden right now, where a lot of people have converged, and some people earlier tried to move up to Government House to the chief executive's residence, but others are also heading towards Sai Ying-pun, which is where the Beijing liaison office is located. And one slightly strange thing that seems to have been happening is people have been advancing, and quite a few times now they've rushed back all of a sudden, suggesting that there may be police further up that are trying to prevent them from moving forward. And we were at the liaison office earlier on, and the security around that area is very, very tight indeed. And as we know, a few weeks ago that was the site of some very violent clashes when a lot of tear gas and rubber bullets were fired, and that is certainly a situation that all would like to avoid if there is going to be any unrest today.
All right, so today is much about the anniversary. Next weekend, will we see people on the streets again, and what again will be on the agenda? Tell us. Well, that's right. Today was meant to be the big march to take place, but there's a whole series of events that are continuing throughout the next few days. Tomorrow there is meant to be some sort of protest taking place at the airport. We're not sure how that's going to happen exactly, because security there has been beefed up following the siege that took place several weeks ago that caused some serious transport difficulty for Hong Kong. There's also meant to be a strike that's to take place from Monday onwards for 2 days. So again, we're expecting to see traffic being seriously disrupted. And also critically, one of the things that is happening later on in the week is that secondary schools are meant to be boycotting classes. And the government up until now had been hoping that once the start of term arrives, that some of the protests would die down. Of course, many of those out here are students, secondary school students, as well as university students, but it doesn't appear as that's going to deter them at all for the time being. All right, Peter, thanks very much indeed. We'll leave it there for the time being. Thanks very much for that update. That's our correspondent, Peter Fok, is in Hong Kong at the moment, and demonstrators again on the streets, and this has carried on for about 12 weeks now.